The journey home. After the incident at the bakery, the old man continued his journey back to his hometown, a place he once called home, where memories of his youth and the sorrows of war lingered. It was also where he hoped to find traces of his long-lost son, whom he always believed was still alive. The rickety old bus rolled along mist-covered country roads. Most passengers were rural folk, carrying bundles of goods, fresh vegetables, or a few hens caged in wicker baskets. The hum of lively conversations filled the air, occasionally interrupted by bursts of laughter. William sat quietly in the back corner of the bus, listening in silence as his mind drifted back to distant memories. His gaze rested on the window, where the scenery gradually shifted from the cold concrete buildings of the city to lush green fields. Rice paddies stretched endlessly toward the horizon, with the occasional glimpse of buffalo grazing leisurely. A soft breeze carrying the faint scent of young rice wafted in through the slightly open window, coaxing a gentle smile onto William's face. That familiar aroma resurrected images of his younger days, times when his family gathered together in a small, warm house. His mind conjured up the image of his old home. He recalled every small detail. The wooden window that was always left open in the morning to welcome the sun, the simple dining table where his family shared humble but warm meals. In his heart, the image of his wife and son appeared vividly. The little boy, with bright eyes and a mischievous smile, used to run around the yard, chatting excitedly about his dreams. Now, those images were merely memories he clung to in solitude. The bus continued winding its way along narrow, curving roads. On either side were rows of bamboo swaying gently in the breeze. The rustling of leaves blended with the distant chirping of birds, making the scene feel alive. Red-tiled houses peeked out behind the trees, with smoke spiraling upwards from kitchen fires, evoking thoughts of cozy family dinners. William instinctively reached into his pocket, where he always kept an old family photo, faded with time, yet still his most treasured possession. Occasionally, his fellow passengers glanced at him. They saw an old man with a weary demeanor, wearing a worn-out coat and clutching a wooden cane placed by his feet. Yet his eyes, though tinged with melancholy, held a glimmer of something indescribable, a fragile hope amidst life's storms. No one knew his story, but they sensed he was returning to a place that was more than just a hometown. It was a repository of the most important parts of his heart. When the bus reached its final stop, William slowly stepped off. A cold wind swept over him, but it couldn't dim the light in his aged eyes. The familiar village road lay before him. The ancient banyan tree at the village entrance still stood tall, its gnarled roots firmly anchored in the earth, a testament to time. With each step, William felt the pulse of memories mingling with reality. Yet his heart was filled with trepidation. Would his hometown recognize him, or was he merely a stranger lost in the changes of time? A heartbreaking truth. As William approached his old house, his heart tightened. Instead of the familiar wooden home, he was met with an empty lot overgrown with wild grass. The house that had once held countless memories was now reduced to faint remnants of stone walls, covered in vines and moss. An old well still stood there, but its water was now murky and nearly half filled with debris. William stood frozen, staring at the scene, overwhelmed by an indescribable pain. The neighbors he once knew were no longer there. In their place were unfamiliar faces, cold and indifferent, who regarded him as an outsider. He forced a faint smile and walked toward a man hunched over, fixing a bicycle in front of a house. But as William opened his mouth to speak, the man gave him a curt nod and turned away, paying no mind to his presence. The encounter at the tea stall. William moved toward a small tea stall by the roadside to ask for information. The modest shop, with its tin roof and worn-out plastic chairs, was a gathering spot for villagers. The shopkeeper, a burly middle-aged man, eyed William with suspicion. "Who are you looking for?" the shopkeeper asked in a tone that was anything but friendly. "I used to live here. The old house at the village entrance. What happened to it?" William asked, his voice trembling, his eyes still clinging to a shred of hope. The shopkeeper smirked and chuckled derisively. "That house was sold a long time ago, old man. You should know by now. Anyone who can't afford to stay here has to leave. That place belongs to someone else now." William stood motionless, gripping his wooden cane tightly as though to steady himself. He tried to ask more. When was it sold? Does anyone remember me? But his voice grew smaller, as if trying to grasp at something that had already slipped away. A few patrons turned to look at him, their gazes tinged with mockery. A woman at a nearby table, holding an old-fashioned hand fan, whispered loudly enough for him to hear, "Probably just another old beggar wandering back here to mooch." Those words pierced William's dignity like a knife. He stood in silence, unable to respond. He wanted to ask more questions, but the cold indifference and condescending stares of the people around him made him swallow his words. Smirks and faint laughter echoed around him, suffocating the air. The pain within, William stepped back, his legs trembling. His heart felt like it had shattered into pieces. The image of his hometown as he remembered it, friendly neighbors, children playing in the streets, was completely gone. What remained was unfamiliarity, indifference, and a harsh reality he couldn't bring himself to accept. As he turned to leave the tea stall, he heard the shopkeeper's voice again, laced with sarcasm. "Old man like you should just stay in the city. What's the point of being here? It'll only make things harder." William didn't look back, but his hand tightened around his cane, veins bulging against his frail skin. A wave of humiliation, grief, and helplessness surged through him. His heart screamed, but he couldn't find the words to respond. All he could do was keep walking, each step slow and heavy, carrying the weight of his past and the coldness of the present. Silent tears rolled down his weathered face. But William didn't cry for the home he had lost. He cried because the place he once called home had now become unbearably foreign. Hope shattered. William stepped out of the tea stall, trying not to reveal the pain he felt. His steps were slow, his frail shoulders hunched as if carrying the weight of an entire lifetime. His gaze was lost amidst the rural scenery that had changed so much over the years. He thought to himself that perhaps he should find the village head, a dear old friend he had once been very close to. As he reminisced about his friend, memories of the days they used to sit under the old banyan tree at the village entrance flooded back. They would talk about everything in life, and the village head was always full of wise advice and ready to help anyone in need. But now, as William asked around, he learned that the village head had passed away years ago. The news crushed him. Another harsh truth surfaced. His close friend was gone, and with him went the remaining fragments of a time when William still belonged to this place. Those who once knew William had either moved away or no longer remembered him. The old houses he passed were silent and lifeless. The distant barking of dogs mixed with the rustling of leaves in the cold wind. No one recognized him. He was merely a stranger walking through a place he once called home. The late afternoon sun cast its faint rays over the fields as it sank lower in the sky. The dry yellow rice stalks rustled in the wind, whispering the voices of the past. The cold breeze chilled his skin, making his legs tremble, yet he trudged onward. Step by step, he made his way down the dirt road toward a place he knew would remain unchanged, the small grave beside the banyan tree where his wife was buried. When he arrived, he paused before the grave. The simple stone marker was covered in moss, but in his mind, her name remained as clear as ever. He knelt down, his hands clutching the earth as if trying to hold on to something still tangible. Tears streamed down his weathered face, soaking into the dry soil. "My dear, I've come back. But everything has changed," he choked out, his voice breaking in the quiet stillness. The wind blew through, scattering dry leaves across the ground as if responding to his words. It felt as though the heavens and the earth were sharing his sorrow in that moment. He bowed his head lower, silently recounting to his late wife everything he had endured. The cruelty of the city, the humiliation at the bakery, and the sense of abandonment in his own hometown. Each word felt like tearing his heart apart, yet he continued, for it was the only way he could feel less alone. The pain he felt was not just from the changes in his hometown, but also from the profound sense of isolation, of no longer belonging anywhere. He realized that the place he once called home now only existed in his memories. He was nothing more than a ghost, wandering through a harsh and unfamiliar reality. A sudden gust of wind swept through, dislodging a single leaf from the ancient tree. It drifted gently to the ground before him. Picking it up, he held it in his hand, feeling its fragility. "Maybe you want me to keep going," he whispered, carefully placing the leaf on the stone marker. Though his heart ached, a small flicker of light appeared within him. He understood that his journey was not yet over. Perhaps something still awaited him ahead. A final ray of hope. As William prepared to leave, his legs heavy and his heart fractured, a voice called out from behind. "Excuse me, sir. Are you Mr. William?" He turned around to see a young man with a sincere, weathered face. Dressed in old work clothes and sweating after a long day of labor, the man's eyes shone with warmth, like a comforting light in the dark. The young man approached cautiously, speaking again with care. "My father used to tell me many stories about you. Are you Mr. William, my father's friend?" William nodded, his gaze a mixture of astonishment and emotion. "Yes, I was your father's friend. How is he?" The young man lowered his head, his voice tinged with sorrow. "My father passed away a few years ago, but before he left, he often spoke of you and the memories you shared. I'm so happy to meet you today." Those words were like a stream of warmth flowing into William's aged and weary heart. The young man invited him into his home, a small but tidy place lit by the gentle glow of an oil lamp on the table. The lingering aroma of dinner stirred a faint hunger in William, a sensation he had grown used to suppressing over the past days. The young man offered him a seat, poured him a cup of hot tea, and served a simple meal of steamed rice and stir-fried vegetables. William gazed at the modest meal, his heart brimming with gratitude. It had been so long since he felt the warmth of a family meal. Each bite of rice and sip of tea soothed the deep ache and fatigue that had weighed on him for so long. As the fire crackled in the hearth, William began sharing his story. He spoke of his journey back to his hometown, the changes he could not accept, and his longing for his son, the child he still believed was alive. The young man listened attentively, nodding in empathy, occasionally asking gentle questions to better understand. It seemed as though he, too, could feel some part of the old man's pain and loss. "Don't worry, sir. I'll do my best to help you find news of your son," the young man said firmly. "Some people in the village keep old records, and I know a few places we can search for information. We'll start from there." William's eyes lit up, as if a new fire had been ignited within him. Thank you so much," he repeated, his voice trembling with emotion. It had been such a long time since he had experienced genuine kindness and shared humanity. The journey to find hope. The next morning, the two began their journey. They walked along familiar village paths, visiting elderly residents who still remembered the past. A few of them recalled William and shared stories of his younger days. Those stories stirred a mix of emotions within him, nostalgia and a bittersweet longing, as though he were reliving the vibrant days of his youth. They also visited old village records, which documented the lives of those who had left for war. However, the information they found was scarce. The faded, yellowed pages with barely legible handwriting provided only vague clues. Still, neither of them gave up. The young man encouraged William, saying, "We've already come so far, sir. Who knows? Just a little more patience, and you might find what you're looking for." One evening, as they sat by the fire in the small house, William gazed into the flickering flames, his eyes filled with deep reflection. "I thought I had lost everything," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But perhaps, in loss, we still find something valuable." The young man smiled and nodded in agreement. "You're right, sir. Sometimes, journeys like this aren't just about finding what we've lost, but also about rediscovering ourselves." An unexpected night visitor. As William was preparing to rest that night, a knock broke the stillness of the quiet evening. The young man opened the door and was surprised to see a stranger standing there, his appearance hurried and holding an old letter in his hand. The stranger explained that the letter had been found in an abandoned house in a nearby village and bore the name of William's son. William's eyes lit up, and his hands trembled as he accepted the letter. When he unfolded it, faint, time-worn handwriting emerged, detailing an unfamiliar address. The last line read, "I am safe. Don't worry about me." The room fell silent. The young man looked at William, his expression a mix of surprise and hope. "Sir, this might be the clue you need to find your son," he said, his voice full of emotion. William clutched the letter tightly, tears streaming down his face. But this time, they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of hope. He raised his head, his eyes shining with determination. "I have to find him," he declared, his voice filled with newfound energy. The story continues. William's journey to find his long-lost son wasn't just a quest to reconnect with family. It was also a path toward rediscovering himself. Would the letter lead him to a happy ending, or would new challenges arise along his journey? Stay tuned for the next chapter to uncover the wonders that fate may yet hold.